Animals really do have so much heart. This dog was left behind at an airport, but what happened next is something you won't forget. Thomas was packing up for what he thought would be his last deployment. His chest tightened when he looked over and saw his dog, Radar, lying quietly next to the bed. This deployment wasn't supposed to happen. He truly believed the last one had already come and gone. But now, one more mission stood between him and retirement. Just a few months. And then he could finally be home with Radar for good. Normally, his parents would watch Radar while he was gone. But this time, they had planned a long-awaited trip, one they'd dreamed about for years, because they thought Thomas would already be back home. They offered to cancel, but he wouldn't let them do that. Some of his friends offered to help out. One of them in particular was very eager, almost pushy about it. Thomas had some doubts. This guy had been pretty unreliable when they were younger, but recently he seemed more stable, more settled. He even said he was thinking about getting a dog of his own. Watching Radar, who was about as low maintenance and sweet as a dog could be, would be a good test run. He promised to take good care of him and to keep Thomas updated. Radar seemed to like him too, so in the end, Thomas agreed. The day of departure came. It was time to say goodbye. The friend was actually on time to pick them up and drive Thomas to the airport. Radar wasn't quite his usual relaxed self, but the friend tried to reassure Thomas, promising again that he'd look after the dog. Thomas knelt down and wrapped his arms around Radar, holding him tight. Then he handed the leash over. Radar tried to follow him, straining forward as Thomas walked away. When he realized he couldn't go, Radar let out a soft moan. As Thomas disappeared through the airport doors, the friend tugged on the leash, ready to leave, but Radar wouldn't move. He dropped to the ground and refused to budge. The friend pulled. He pleaded. But Radar was a big dog, and when he didn't want to move, that was that. The friend even tried picking him up, but Radar went completely limp, sliding out of his arms like a sack of wet laundry. It was like trying to carry a stubborn toddler, only heavier. The friend's patience was wearing thin. He didn't seem to care how sad the dog was. He just didn't want to deal with it. So he made a snap decision. He dropped the leash and started walking away, hoping Radar would get scared and chase after him. But Radar didn't even flinch. The moment the friend was far enough away, Radar got up. Then, without any warning, he ran. The friend tried to keep up for a little while, but he quickly gave up. He was frustrated, out of breath, and more irritated than concerned. He searched for a bit, but not for long. When the dog didn't come back right away, this man just gave up. If Radar didn't want to go with him, then fine. He wasn't going to fight him. So he turned around and drove off. It wasn't until he was already in the car on the way home that the full weight of what he'd done hit him. He'd have to explain to Thomas that he left his dog behind at an airport. That thought didn't sit well. So he decided not to say anything. Thomas would be gone for a few months anyway. He figured he'd just tell him the dog had run off right before he got back. He hoped by then it would all blow over. But if he had followed Radar even for just a few more minutes, he would have seen where the dog was headed. Radar had been to the airport with Thomas and his parents before. He remembered the layout, the sounds, the smells. He knew exactly where to go. So he trotted straight to the arrivals gate, the place where his dad usually appeared. And then he waited. Radar curled up by the gate, his leash still trailing behind him. He didn't cause a fuss. A few kids walked past and stopped to pet him. He wagged his tail, let them scratch his head, even closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the small kindness. But when they tugged at his leash, he wouldn't go. He was waiting for one person only. Tanya, one of the airport's delivery directors, noticed the dog while doing her rounds. She passed by him a few times that day. Eventually, she stopped and crouched down to give him a snack and a gentle pat. Later, when she saw him still lying there hours later, her concern grew. She checked with every airline, asking if they were missing a dog, especially the ones that handled pet transport. But no one had any record of him. Everyone agreed he didn't belong to the airport or to any flight. Tanya could tell he wasn't just lost. He was waiting. Radar was clean, had a collar, and still wore his leash. Someone had cared for him, and clearly he was loved. Tanya didn't know how he ended up alone at the airport, but she knew she wanted to help. That night, she kept thinking about the dog. First thing the next morning, she went straight back to Arrival's. And there he was, right where she'd left him, still waiting. He looked tired. His eyes were heavy, and he moved slowly. Tanya approached him again, speaking softly and offering another snack. His ears perked up just enough to show he was listening. When she turned to walk away this time, he followed her, head low, leash dragging behind him. Tanya led him to her office, a big space with its own little fenced-in courtyard outside. It even had a patch of grass, safe and quiet. No traffic, no loud noises. She filled a bowl with food and another with water. Radar ate slowly, carefully, like he was used to a routine. She unclipped his leash to help him relax. A few days later, she'd remove the harness too, just so he could lie down easier and not get snagged on anything. For the next few days, she kept the office door open for him. She left food, gave him space, and watched him come and go. Radar quickly learned to head out into the little courtyard when he needed a bathroom break. He'd nap in the sun when the airport was quiet and the world felt still. But every time the gates opened, he looked up, waiting, hoping. Tanya tried a few times to take him home with her, gently encouraging him to leave the airport. He would follow her all the way to the door. But once there, he'd stop. Dig in, refuse to go any farther. His eyes said it all. He wasn't leaving without his person. Tanya didn't push. She let him stay. He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't barking or causing trouble. He was just waiting. Most importantly, Radar was safe, for now. And as the days passed, everyone at the airport began to get attached to him. It helped that this was a small airport, the kind of place where people could be a little more flexible. At a bigger airport, it probably wouldn't have been allowed. But here, he could stay in the one place he refused to leave. A few more days went by, and he was still there. He started sleeping in Tanya's office every night. So she got him a cozy dog bed for her office and even brought a pillow to the arrivals terminal, where he still spent most of his day waiting. When she called his name, he'd perk up and trot beside her as she made her way through the airport. One day, she took him to the animal transport area. They had a scanner that could check for a microchip. And that's when they finally got a breakthrough. Radar had a chip. They scanned it, and right away, they learned his name. The moment someone said Radar, his tail wagged like crazy. He got all excited, clearly recognizing his name and the sound of someone saying it with love. They also got the owner's contact info, Thomas's phone number and home address. Tanya didn't waste a second. She called the number listed, hoping for a quick reunion. But the call didn't go through. Thomas was way off the grid. No signal, no way to reach him. He still had no idea that anything had gone wrong. In a way, that might have been a blessing. If Thomas had known Radar was missing, it could have distracted him during his deployment, and that could have been dangerous. His parents, on the other hand, had tried checking in with the friend who was supposed to be caring for the dog. The friend reassured them that everything was fine, that Radar was doing great. He said all the right things, while Radar was actually sitting alone at an airport, still waiting. But Tanya didn't give up. She took the address from the microchip and went to the house. It was locked up tight. Clearly, no one was home. She knocked anyway, just in case. That's when a neighbor passed by and explained that Thomas was currently deployed. It all started making sense. She still didn't know how Radar had ended up alone at the airport, but at least now she knew who he belonged to and who he was waiting for. From that moment on, she made a quiet promise to herself. She was going to look after this dog until Thomas came home. And sometimes, people really do come through in ways you don't expect. The whole airport team joined in to help care for Radar. They gave him love, attention, and made sure he felt safe. He stuck close to Tanya, treating her like his second home, while still keeping watch for the one person he truly wanted. The more comfortable he got, the more his sweet personality came out. Radar welcomed attention from all kinds of people. He especially loved kids. He'd sit with them, play with them, and help distract little ones waiting for their flights. But every now and then, Radar did something even more special, something that reminded everyone just how remarkable he really was. This was a dog who'd been left behind at an airport, but somehow he never stopped being gentle and full of love. And what he did next was enough to bring tears to anyone's eyes. One day, a young woman sat alone near the departure gates, quietly crying. People noticed, but they kept their distance, trying to respect her space. No one wanted to intrude, except for Radar. He didn't care about being polite or following unwritten rules. He just knew someone needed him. He walked straight up to her and gently licked her fingers. She looked down in surprise, then wrapped her arms around him and cried into his soft fur. This young woman was terrified. It was her first time living and working far from home. And then, out of nowhere, her family had called. Her dad had fallen seriously ill, so sick they didn't know if he would make it. She had to get home fast. She felt completely alone and overwhelmed, but Radar felt her fear and gave her exactly what she needed: quiet comfort. He didn't move. He just sat there beside her while she clung to him and let the tears fall. After a while, her crying slowed down, and she started stroking his head gently, calming down bit by bit. Tanya had noticed the moment, too. She walked over, handed the girl a bottle of water and a snack, and sat down to talk. She didn't pry, just offered kindness and calm company. Together, she and Radar stayed with the young woman until her gate finally opened and it was time for her flight. She left feeling so much lighter than when she arrived. And a few weeks later, she came back just to find them again. Her dad was recovering. Things were looking up. From that day on, Radar wasn't just the airport dog. He became something more. He had a gift, an ability to sense when someone was hurting. And every time, he'd go straight to them, quietly offering comfort without being asked. The airport staff started calling him their unofficial emotional support dog. And he truly was. He helped people every day: nervous travelers, homesick kids, tearful goodbyes. Radar was there through it all. But no matter how many people loved him, and there were many, they all saw the same thing in his eyes. He still missed his best friend. Radar had now been living at the airport for over 3 months. That's a long time for any dog to wait. Meanwhile, Thomas's parents had returned from their trip. They were expecting to pick Radar up, just like they always did. But when they reached out to the friend who'd promised to care for him, something felt off. The man kept dodging their calls and making excuses. He was too busy to bring the dog over. Said he couldn't meet them. It didn't sit right. They started wondering if he was hiding something, maybe even trying to keep Radar for himself. But Thomas was coming home soon, and they were determined to figure out what had really happened. What none of them could have imagined was what happened next. One ordinary day, Tanya was walking through the airport, calling Radar along as usual. She asked if he wanted a snack, and he followed, trotting behind her toward the office. But then, suddenly, he stopped. His ears twitched, turning in different directions like little antennas. He stood still for just a second, listening. And then he ran, just bolted down the hallway, fast and sure. Tanya's heart jumped. Something had caught his attention. She ran after him, wanting to see what had set him off like that. At that exact moment, Thomas had just stepped off the plane. He was standing near the baggage claim, talking to an older woman as he helped her lift her bag. And that must have been the moment Radar heard his voice. Thomas was going through the motions, grabbing his bag, nodding politely. But his head was somewhere else. He'd come home a few days early to surprise his parents, but really, all he could think about was seeing his dog. He'd been calling his friend nonstop, trying to arrange it. The guy had only answered once, then pretended like the call dropped. Thomas was beyond frustrated and had planned to head straight to his house. But then everything changed. He stepped out of the arrivals area and froze. He heard barking, loud, familiar, full of energy. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that bark. But it couldn't be. Could it? No one knew he was coming home early. So how could Radar be here? And then he saw him. Radar came flying toward him at full speed. Thomas barely had time to drop to his knees before the dog launched into his arms. If he hadn't, Radar probably would have knocked him over anyway. There was no doubt to anyone watching. This dog had just found his person. Radar was completely overwhelmed with joy. His tail wagged so hard it shook his whole body. He couldn't stop licking Thomas's face, whining with excitement between kisses. Thomas had tears in his eyes, holding on tight, still trying to make sense of what was happening. He looked around, expecting to see his parents, maybe even his friend, but all he saw were strangers. Airport workers, people watching quietly, many with tears in their eyes. And one woman standing nearby, crying openly. Radar turned toward her, still bouncing with excitement, and started circling around her like he was introducing his dad to someone special. She knelt down and spoke to him gently. They clearly knew each other. Thomas was confused, but then Tanya stepped forward. She introduced herself, smiling warmly through her own tears, and told him how happy she was to finally meet him. She offered to grab coffee and explain everything. As they walked through the airport together, it was surreal. Everyone knew Radar. Staff waved, passengers smiled, kids whispered, "That's the dog from the gate." And slowly, the pieces came together. Thomas was shocked, furious even. He couldn't believe what Radar had gone through, and how his so-called friend hadn't even told him the truth. But most of all, he was grateful. In a world full of letdowns, people like Tanya reminded him that there was still good out there. Radar was safe, and Thomas was officially retired. He promised his pup he'd never leave him again. As for the friend, Thomas never heard from him again, and he never reached out to let him know Radar was found. But Tanya? She stayed in their lives. She and Thomas became good friends, and both of them continued to care deeply for the dog that had touched so many hearts. Radar had once been abandoned at an airport, but now he was home, safe, loved, and exactly where he belonged. Thanks for watching. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible moments like this. See you next time.